In the first two books of Dune, Paul Atreides is definitely a main character. Book 1 seems to be a classic story of a hero fulfilling his destiny and defeating evil. He emerges as a complex and multi-dimensional character driven by a sense of justice and a desire to navigate the treacherous political landscape of Arrakis. His journey from a privileged noble to a leader among the Fremen sets the stage for his evolution throughout the series. However, in Dune Messiah, Paul Atreides shifts from a potential messiah figure and undergoes apotheosis, elevation to a godlike status. Paul struggles with the unintended consequences of his actions, including the rise of religious fanaticism and rebellion. He grapples with the ethical implications of his role as a messiah figure and the sacrifices necessary to maintain control. The novel's premise suggests power corrupts, but ironically, it portrays Paul as almost perfect, burdened by and limited in his choices. He's a fascinatingly complex, conflicted character. So what is his true story, and is Paul really a hero of the series? House Atreides was an old and wealthy house in the Landsraad, tracing their lineage back thousands of years to King Agamemnon, a son of Atreus, in Greece on Old Earth. The Atreides had a long-standing feud with House Harkonnen dating back 10,000 years to the Battle of Corran. This battle took place 88 years before the Guild, and was the space battle from which the Imperial House Carino took its name. It was fought on Corran near Sigma Draconis, and settled the ascendancy of the ruling house from Seleucus Secundus. After the battle, Bashar Abulurd Harkonnen was accused of cowardice by an Atreides and exiled. This event started the feud between House Harkonnen and House Atreides, which would last for almost 10,000 years. And the current leader of the Harkonnen house, Vladimir Harkonnen, is the direct male descendant of Bashar Abulurd Harkonnen, which only increases the hatred between these two houses. The family kept their ancestral world of Caladan a lush, prosperous paradise with relatively low industrial levels, in stark contrast to the Harkonnen capital of Giedi Prime. They literally are the two completely opposite sides of the same coin. However, the Atreides were also proficient in war. They maintained sword masters, war masters, and mentats to train and lead their army, and had even developed their own battle language. Paul is just 15 years old in the book, and as the heir to House Atreides, there's a lot of pressure on him. He has no friends his own age because of the dangers of assassination. He's highly trained in politics and in combat, and in the book he's trained as a mentat to have a powerful, logical mind like Thufir. Shortly after his 15th birthday in the year 10,191 AG, Paul's father revealed to him that his training, through his teachers, had been geared toward turning Paul into a mentat. The theory was that when Paul succeeded his father as Duke of House Atreides, one of the most respected and moral great houses of the Imperium, a mentat duke would truly be a formidable force in the Landsraad. Leto is not the only parent from whom he is getting training, but from his mother as well. Jessica trains Paul in the way of the Bene Gesserit, to focus his mind and body, his perception and memory, and to use the power of the voice to control people. Paul's latent talent becomes the reason why the Atreides receive a visit from Gaius Helen Mahayim, a reverend mother of the Bene Gesserit, a prestigious order known for enhancing their cognition through drug-induced methods. Reverend mothers possess the collective memories of their ancestors and fellow members, granting them profound insights. Gaius once served as Jessica's mentor at the Bene Gesserit school. Presently, she holds the esteemed role of the Emperor's personal truthsayer, valued for her unparalleled ability to discern falsehoods. Gaius wields considerable power and influence, yet her allegiances are complex and divided between the Emperor, Jessica, and the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood. Gaius gives Paul a test. Paul puts his hand in a box that causes terrible pain, but if he moves the hand, Gaius will kill him with a needle called the Gom Jabbar. So this is a test of self-control. Someone without self-control, like an animal, will instinctively move away from the pain and will die. To survive, you have to withstand the pain, control your body and mind, and master your fear and your instincts. The Bene Gesserit believe that this ability to act consciously and choose to think long-term, not just in the moment, is what separates humans from animals. They give this test to everyone they train so that only responsible, conscious humans gain the power of the Bene Gesserit. They don't want some selfish, impulsive beast like the Harkonnens to misuse their abilities and reproduce. So anyone who fails this test, they kill. but fortunately Jessica's training proved to be instrumental, which helps Paul to pass the test. Paul is human, he has self-control, so he withstands the pain and lives. During this test we hear the litany against fear. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me, and when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. The litany against fear is one of the most iconic verses from the Dune series that holds extremely big philosophical value. It is a remarkable tool. The most remarkable thing about it is its incredible usefulness. Similar to how a knife is used in physical reality, the litany is useful in psychological reality. When fear sets in, the mind is in chaos. To get things started again, its simplicity and its form as a litany is appropriate. In the midst of hostile nothingness, the litany against fear creates a foothold. As mentats have axioms and swordmasters have attitudes, the Bene Gesserit have the litany against fear. These building blocks unfold structures, patterns of possibilities. When used properly, these structures are powerful and magnificent tools. But by merely presupposing building blocks, weaknesses are created as well. The only completely dynamic pattern is consciousness itself. Other structures are static to a variable degree. By supposing axioms, mentats get blind spots in their mental vision. By assuming attitudes, swordmasters become predictable. By balancing the fearlessness of the litany, Bene Gesserit witches develop a different kind of fear. Just where exactly lies the Bene Gesserit weakness? The building block, the litany against fear, is dominantly feminine. Thus, what unfolds is a dominantly female society with a mental, emotional space where they dare not look. Why is the litany dominantly feminine? It presupposes a perspective where the user is passive and the world is active, i.e., fear is destruction that happens to you by the outside world. The masculine counterpart of the litany would be one which presupposes a perspective where the user is active and the world is passive, i.e., fear is destruction that happens to the outside world by you. In the Dune world, a being who is able to move into both places is named Kwisatz Haderach. There exists no separation between man and God. One blends softly, casually into the other. The Kwisatz Haderach stage would be somewhere in the middle, a usable human form for a god. A Kwisatz Haderach changes the world as well as the self. And after this test, this is exactly what we learn. For thousands of years, the Bene Gesserit have manipulated the genetic lines of noble families like the Atreides. They breed certain people with other people, often by marriage to Bene Gesserit women like Jessica. Even the Emperor has a Bene Gesserit wife controlling his reproduction. They select and combine certain genes, trying to produce a superhuman called the Kwisatz Haderach. This chosen one will be able to see into the future and past better than any Bene Gesserit, cause Reverend Mothers like Gaius can only access the memories of their female ancestors. The Kwisatz Haderach will access all memories. He'll be a male Reverend Mother whose powerful mind will guide humanity. So the Bene Gesserit want to create the chosen one, but Jessica has messed with their plan, cause the Bene Gesserit wanted Jessica to have a daughter, not a son. The daughter was gonna marry a Harkonnen and their child would have been the Kwisatz Haderach. But Jessica, with her Bene Gesserit body control, chose to have a son, Paul, instead, because Leto wanted a son and Jessica wanted to make him happy. She chose her family over her duty to the Bene Gesserit, a conflict that continues through her arc. Jessica hopes that Paul will be the Kwisatz Haderach instead, but Gaius is doubtful. Their ancient plan is now uncertain. Paul accompanied his parents when House Atreides relocated to the desert world of Arrakis to manage mining operations of the spice melange. Spice is the most important substance in the Dune universe, because spice not only makes spaceflight possible and can give visions of the future, spice also makes people live longer, extending lifespans by decades. For example, in the books, Emperor Shaddam IV is also addicted to spice, since even though in all the big Dune adaptations the Emperor is played by older men, in truth, that's not how he looks in the book. In the book, Shaddam is 72 years old, but he looks like he's 35, presumably because Shaddam takes spice, because spice extends your life, makes you live longer, and look young. Many people are addicted to spice, and if they stop taking it, they die. It's an addictive, psychic, mind-expanding, life-extending, spaceship-guiding drug, so naturally, spice is the most valuable substance in the universe. And spice only comes from one place, the desert planet Arrakis, also called Dune. Dune. On Arrakis are giant sandworms whose life cycle makes spice. Humans harvest the spice and sell it, so whoever controls Arrakis becomes rich, and by the beginning of the book, Arrakis has been ruled by the brutal House Harkonnen for the last 80 years. However, at the start of the story, the Emperor orders the Harkonnens to leave, and he gives control of the planet to House Atreides, led by Duke Leto. At first, this deal looks extremely good for House Atreides. However, in truth, Arrakis is a trap, secretly set up by the Emperor, and the Harkonnens plan to destroy the Atreides with an army of Sardaukar, who are the Emperor's elite soldiers. Renowned for being brutal and merciless, the Emperor doesn't want the other houses to know that he's attacking the Atreides, so in the book, his Sardaukar are disguised in Harkonnen uniforms. He and the Harkonnens want the Atreides to die in the dark. The reason for these rather bad terms between the Emperor and House Atreides is Leto's popularity and influence among the houses of the Landsraad. He thinks that Leto will use this to finally dethrone him from his position, and his fear makes him resent him. Leto knows that the Emperor and the Harkonnens plan to attack him, but he takes the risk anyway because he believes he can win. Leto plans to use the desert power of Arrakis by making an alliance with the Fremen, the local desert people. In the book, Leto believes that the Fremen will be great soldiers specifically because they live in the harsh environment of Arrakis, just like the Sardaukar are powerful because of the harshness of Seleucus Secundus. So Leto bets everything on this plan to make the Fremen his army to beat the Sardaukar. In the movie, Paul says that he doesn't want to exploit or oppress the Fremen like the Harkonnens did, but in the book, the Atreides don't really care about the Fremen like that. Their goal is to exploit them. The Atreides may seem like heroic good guys, but throughout the book they use immoral, manipulative strategies and were invited to question their morality. Their morality is also tested when Paul and Jessica arrive on Arrakis. The people of Arrakis shout Lisan al-Gaib, which means the voice from the outer world, because there's a prophecy on Arrakis that says there will come a leader, the child of a Bene Gesserit, who will lead Arrakis to freedom. Paul and Jessica seem to fit this prophecy, but the thing is, this prophecy is a lie. It was made up by the Bene Gesserit. The Bene Gesserit have a whole system called the Missionaria Protectiva. For thousands of years, they have spread specific religious ideas or infectious superstitions all over the universe. Particular signs and sayings are planted in local cultures, so if a Bene Gesserit is ever on one of these planets, they can use those signs and sayings to gain power over people by fulfilling the prophecies that they invented. So the people of Arrakis hope that Paul and Jessica are the chosen ones who will free them, but in reality, the Lisan al-Gaib prophecy is a cynical tool used by the Bene Gesserit to control people. The Baron and the Emperor's plan to eliminate the Atreides begins quickly after Paul's family establishes itself on Arrakis. After a supposed assassination on Paul using a hunter-seeker, Dr. Yue lowered the defensive house shields and used sedative drugs to disable Leto, Paul, and Jessica, leaving the Atreides leaderless and disorganized under the Harkonnen and Sardaukar military onslaught in the siege of Arrakeen. The Atreides army was crushed, with only a few remnants managing to escape. This attack marked the beginning of the war. Paul and Jessica were sent into the desert to die. Because of the use of truthsayers in the Empire, the Baron Harkonnen needed to be able to say truthfully that he was not directly responsible for their deaths. However, this plan was foiled by arrangements made by Yue. He hated the Baron and wished to at least save Paul and Jessica, and Paul and Jessica managed to kill their captors and escape into the desert. Paul and Jessica initially met up with planetologist Liet Kynes and swordmaster Duncan Idaho, hiding in a botanical testing station abandoned long ago. However, they were not there long before the station was attacked by Sardaukar, who killed Duncan. Paul and Jessica flee to the deep desert in an ornithopter, parting ways with Dr. Kynes. They let the Harkonnens think that they had died from a Coriolis storm. In the deep desert, under the pressure of extreme circumstances and the increased doses of spice that he has been ingesting simply by living on Arrakis, some of Paul's powers come into fruition and his ability to see possible futures exploded into awareness. He saw many things, a way out of his situation and the restoration of the Atreides, if only he could make contact with the native Fremen and survive. After a dangerous crossing of the desert, Paul and Jessica managed to meet up with a troop of Fremen. Paul and Jessica proved their worth by disarming Fremen in unarmed combat, aided by Bene Gesserit Prana Bindu training, the Weirding Way, and the Fremen leader Stilgar gladly accepted them into his troop because he would like to add that skill to the Fremen people. Paul also met a young woman, Chani, daughter of Liet Kynes, whom he had long seen in his dreams. During this scuffle, Paul disarmed a proud Fremen, Jamis, who took offense at this presumptuous rebellious youth and challenged Paul to a fight to the death. Although at first unwilling to kill, he triumphed easily, making his name in the tribe and also succeeding to the position of head of the household of the dead man. Stilgar gave Paul the name Usul, meaning the strong base of a pillar, as his private name with the troop. Paul gave himself the name Paul Muad'Dib as his public Fremen name. Both of his names have deeper meanings. For example, in the case of Usul, Stilgar wanted to give him a name that symbolized Paul's role not only within the Fedaykin but the Fremen as a whole, especially considering his faith in Paul as the savior that was prophesied. And in the case of Muad'Dib, it means the little desert mouse which hides during the day and travels only at night, that multiplies over the land and makes its own water. That's not the only thing Muad'Dib means though. In the Arrakis night sky, Muad'Dib is one of the main constellations, taking the shape of the little desert mouse. Its tail points to the north, making it one of the most important navigational tools for the Fremen, which is why they call it the one who points the way, and why it makes for such a perfect name for Paul, who is prophesied to be the savior the Fremen waited for so long. When Paul and Jessica returned to the troop's siege, they discovered the Fremen Reverend Mother was near death, and with the fortuitous arrival of Jessica, a Bene Gesserit, they made Jessica their Sayadina. Jessica, not realizing the consequences of what the Fremen were about to do, accepted to cement her place in the tribe because she had no choice. It was either that or death. Halfway through the process, she realized she was making a mistake, that she was involved in a similar process to how the Bene Gesserit make their own Reverend Mothers who could see genetic memories, and realized that the baby in her womb, fathered by Leto before his death, would also go through the process. This had truly unfortunate consequences because it was a Bene Gesserit teaching that any such baby would not have the strength to withstand the memories of its ancestors. By 10,193 AG, 2 years later, Paul had become something of a religious leader among the Fremen. Chani became his lover and bore him a son, whom he called Leto. He and his mother trained the Fremen of Siege Tabor and other Fremen who sought out Paul in his religious guise in the weirding way the Bene Gesserit's Prata-Bindu fighting techniques. Under his leadership, his Fedaykin experienced victory after victory against the Harkonnens, and Paul's prestige and aura among the Fremen grew. However, in order to be truly accepted by the Fremen, he had to become a Sand Rider. Paul attempted it and succeeded, becoming a full member of the Siege. That same day, a band of smugglers sought melange too deep in the desert, and the Fremen of Siege Tabor sprung a trap. In the middle of the battle, Paul recognized his weapons teacher, Gurney Halleck, and called on him and his men to surrender. Gurney was overjoyed and overwhelmed in equal measure. He surrendered his men and joined Paul's service. Among Gurney's men, however, were some Imperial spies who attempted to kill Paul. They were unsuccessful, and they were captured by the Fedaykin. Paul gave secret orders for the spies to be allowed to escape so that they would reveal that Paul Atreides still lived on Arrakis. Taking advantage of recruiting Gurney Halleck, Paul used the moment to solve his leadership problem. Since he had become a Worm Rider, many of his followers had expected him to challenge Stilgar, his greatest friend among the Fremen, in order to take control of Siege Tabor. But Paul broke tradition, and in doing so forced Stilgar to do the same, managing to sidestep this issue by proclaiming himself the ruling Duke of Arrakis, and thus took power without killing his friend. They returned to Siege Tabor. Gurney was shocked to discover Jessica is still alive because he believed she was the one who betrayed the Atreides and that Paul did not know. Gurney was about to kill her when Paul walked in, managed to stop him, and explained that Yue was the traitor. Gurney was almost broken by his nearly fatal and tragic error, but Jessica forgave him, and he was bound even further into the Atreides and Jessica's service. Paul's power among the Fremen grew, but he was still frustrated. He was not all he could be. He could not control his journeys into the future, and much of it was still blank to him. So he took a truly risky step and consumed a tiny amount of spice essence, and so attempted to perform the male equivalent of the Reverend Mother ceremony. Previously to this, no man had survived this experience, and it seemed that he failed also because he sank into a coma. Paul neglected to tell anyone what he was doing. Many people thought he was dead, although others, primarily the Fedaykin, believed he is in a religious trance. His mother, Jessica, did all she could do to wake him but failed. So out of desperation, she called Chani from the deep desert to help. Chani, through her more personal knowledge of Paul's dreams and desires, realized what a mad thing Paul has done, and used spice essence converted by Jessica using her powers as a Reverend Mother to bring him out of his trance. For Paul, no time had passed, and he gloried in his new memories and powers. He told his mother and Chani immediately that the Emperor himself was currently orbiting the planet with many Sardaukar ready to attack. He had proven the Bene Gesserit wrong. He was the Kwisatz Haderach, appearing one generation ahead of the prediction. He declared that it was now time to destroy the Harkonnens. Fremen attacks on the Harkonnens had already managed to almost entirely stop the flow of the spice from Arrakis. This forced the Emperor to act, and he came to Arrakis with all his Sardaukar, and also levied all of the other noble houses to annihilate the Fremen if necessary in order to get the spice flowing again. By now, the Emperor was aware of who Muad'Dib was. In advance of his arrival, he sent a large Sardaukar force into the deep desert for information. Attacking a siege, they managed to kill Paul's son and capture Alia, Paul's sister, who was already born in the books, unlike in the movies, but were driven off by Fremen children, old people, and women. In the Dune book, Paul observes a fight between the Fremen and the Sardaukar. He doesn't participate in the combat. The book tells us he thought bitterly that here was another chapter in the legend of Paul Muad'Dib. I didn't even draw my knife, but it'll be said of this day I slew 20 Sardaukar by my own hand. So the book explores the idea of Paul being portrayed as more of a warrior than he truly is. Ironic then that the new movie has Paul fighting even more soldiers. In the book, Paul sees people dying in his visions of the future, so he weeps for those not yet dead, but Chani says let them have their time of life. Chani helps ground Paul in the present and to appreciate life despite his visions. After the Emperor himself had landed, Paul launched the final attack. Using House Atreides' family atomics that his men managed to retrieve after the Harkonnen attack, he blew a hole in the shield wall that protected the capital of Arrakeen from the surrounding desert and its fierce storms. By using the weapons this way, he narrowly avoided contravening the universal ban against using atomics on people, which would have required the other noble houses to retaliate with planetary annihilation. The Fremen attacked under the cover of a huge desert storm, riding sandworms from the desert through the hole in the shield wall. The great static force of the sandworm then shorted out all of the Sardaukar's defensive shields. The Sardaukar were unable to withstand the full force of the Fremen, caught as they were in total surprise, and the Emperor was forced to surrender. The combined forces of the Landsraad still loomed in orbit around the planet, but Paul threatened to destroy the spice if any of them tried to land, and they backed off. In the surprise of Muad'Dib's attack, Alia managed to escape and in the process killed the Baron Harkonnen. Realizing that Muad'Dib was not some mad Fremen religious leader changed the situation dramatically for the Emperor. Feyd-Rautha, the Baron's nephew, an acclaimed gladiator, challenged Paul to single combat, claiming rights of Conley as had been declared by Paul's father Leto. Paul agreed even knowing that it is possible he would die, but after a difficult fight during which Feyd-Rautha attempted treachery in the form of a poisoned knife and needle, Paul eventually triumphed. He forced the Emperor from the throne by the simple expedience of taking power from the real rulers of the Empire, the Spacing Guild, who controlled spice travel. He again threatened to destroy the spice if they did not ship all the troops home. The Spacing Guild had no choice. Their limited powers of seeing prophecy showed Paul is capable of it, and they sent everyone home. The Emperor abdicated and retired to Seleucus Secundus in 10,196 AG. Paul married the Emperor's eldest daughter, Irulan, and Paul becomes Emperor of the universe. So Book 1 seems to be a classic story of a hero fulfilling his destiny and defeating evil. However, in Book 2, Messiah, we see Paul who is very different from his Book 1 self. The book takes place 12 years after the first one. Shortly after Paul becomes the Emperor, he accepts the role of Mahdi to the Fremen and enacts a strategy that had been revealed to him through his prescient abilities. He starts Muad'Dib's Jihad, a religious crusade. This decision saw the theology and many customs of the Fremen thrust into the whole of the Empire. This jihad spread throughout the entire universe, pillaging millions of planets. A few campaigns include those on Naraj and its moons. The Fremen Fedaykin commander Farok was the head of the Naraj campaign. The only planet that was spared the raging fire of Muad'Dib's jihad was the homeworld of House Atreides, Caladan. Lady Jessica, mother of Paul Muad'Dib, refused the Fremen any access to the planet, including religious pilgrimage. The jihad ended in 10,208 AG. This jihad resulted in the death of over 61 billion people, the sterilization of over 90 planets, and the demoralization of over 500 additional worlds. Additionally, over 40 different religions were wiped out, along with their followers, and over 10,000 worlds eventually joined the Atreides Empire. On the other hand, another result of this action was that Paul Atreides himself became a revered godhead on many worlds in the known universe. Interestingly enough, Stilgar hates and resents the deification of Paul. It replaces his traditional religion. Besides, Stilgar liked Paul as a young person under his protection and now refuses to view him as a godlike figure. This is a very effective way of showing that, while Paul is the most powerful emperor ever, he is ironically powerless to stop the lethal religious excesses of the juggernaut he has created. Although 60 billion people have perished, Paul's prescient visions indicate that this is far from the worst possible outcome for humanity. Paul's prescience reveals to him the golden path, a complex and perilous path for the future that would eventually save humanity from stagnation and extinction. Even with his considerable powers, Paul struggled to determine the best path through the maze of decisions presented to him. This was possibly due to the fact that he was not the ultimate Kwisatz Haderach, having been born a generation sooner than the Bene Gesserit had planned. It was more likely, however, that Paul's difficulty with maintaining a clear oracular vision was because of his own emotions. Much like his father, Paul was forever tempted by a simpler life, far away from the intrigues and dangers of prescience, imperial politics, and war. He was also continuously haunted by the death of his father and the manner in which his house was betrayed by so many. After the bloody jihad ended, Emperor Paul Muad'Dib Atreides eventually subdued all outright rebellion. The order of the known universe was maintained through the replacement of Carino imperial power, which was supported by Sardaukar military strength, with Atreides imperial power supported by Fremen military strength. Paul's interpretation of his prescient visions also necessitated that Arrakis be transformed from a barren desert planet into a lush and fertile world, with the exception of a small desert for the sandworm to remain alive and keep producing spice. By the end of his rule, this plan was well on its way to succeeding. This program had begun under Pardot Kynes as an attempt to harness the planet. However, under Paul, it became part of a plan to save humanity. Despite his strong leadership and formidable prescient abilities, Emperor Paul Atreides began to feel building pressure from discordant groups within the Empire, notably the Bene Gesserit, who have lost control of their Kwisatz Haderach, fringe groups within the Fremen, the Spacing Guild, who are now utterly beholden to Paul, and the dethroned but still powerful House Carino. One of the conspirators are also Bene Tleilax. They haven't appeared in the movies yet, but play a pivotal role in the future books, similar to Bene Gesserit. They are a group of secretive, genetically altered humans who inhabited Tleilax, the sole planet of the star Thalim. The customs and ethics of the Bene Tleilax led to widespread revulsion by the other cultures of the known universe, a reaction that did little to quench the Tleilaxu's hunger to subjugate their rivals. Their skills with genetic engineering, however, made them effectively a necessary evil. You can say that the Bene Gesserit and Tleilaxu are gender-flipped mirror images of each other. Both look on the opposite sex with disdain and objectify them. The Bene Gesserit use language of animal husbandry in reference to males, like using him to stud, while the Tleilaxu physically objectify their women, turning them into axolotl tanks. Both use a form of genetic memory. For the Bene Gesserit, it comes in the form of other memory, remembering the lives of their maternal lines, while the Tleilaxu used restored Gola's memories to restore their own memories. With all of these powerful groups plotting, the situation becomes extremely shaky for Paul's empire. It doesn't help the situation that the Atreides dynasty is considered unstable because Paul has not produced an heir. Chani, his lover and concubine, is secretly given contraceptives by the Princess Irulan Carino, Paul's wife in title only. Though Paul is aware of this scenario, he has foreseen that the birth of his heir will bring Chani's death, and he does not want to lose her. But his hopes are put into question after Chani switches to an ancient Fremen fertility diet and subsequently conceives. The conspiring parties, intent on ending the Atreides empire, give Paul a gift he cannot resist: hate. A Gola of Duncan, Idaho, his childhood teacher and friend. The conspirators hope the presence of hate will undermine Paul's ability to rule by forcing Paul to question himself and the empire he has created. Furthermore, Paul's acceptance of the gift weakens Paul's support among the Fremen, who see the Tleilaxu and their tools as unclean. Additionally, the Bene Tleilax who created the Gola hope that it will provide them extra insight and control through espionage orders embedded in his psyche. Further complicating the situation is the physical maturity of Paul's powerful sister, Alia, who finds herself irresistibly attracted to Hate/Duncan. Alia and Hate investigate the appearance of a female corpse near the city. Hate realizes that the fact that no one has been reported missing implies a Tleilaxu plot in which the woman has been replaced by a face dancer who was a member of a race bred by the Beni Tleilax. Their standing in Tleilaxu society fell below that of the Tleilaxu master, and their ability to mimic other individuals made them popular for numerous roles, including spies and assassins. Paul demands to see Mahayam, who fears she will be killed, but instead discovers Paul wants to bargain with her. Paul offers to produce a child by artificial insemination in return for the survival of Chani and her child. Mahayam, desperate to regain the Atreides genes for the Bene Gesserit breeding program, would have to violate Butlerian jihad taboos against the use of computers. Furthermore, she realizes no child born in this way would be a candidate for the Golden Lion throne, and that the Bene Gesserit could never admit to the existence of such a child without risking their position in the Empire. She decides that she must consult with her Bene Gesserit counterparts on Valak 9. 6 weeks later, Chani is seen by a medic and discovers her pregnancy has become complicated because of the contraceptives introduced to her system. Realizing that only Irulan could be the perpetrator, Chani wishes to kill her but is prevented by Paul. She questions whether it is sensible for Paul to continue to spar with Hate, and Paul replies that the Tleilaxu have made him better than they could know and that it may be possible to restore Hate's memories as Duncan Idaho. Unknown to Paul, this is precisely the Tleilaxu plan, to restore Hate's memories as Idaho, thus fulfilling a long-time technological ambition and proving to Paul that they could clone and restore Chani to him after she dies in childbirth for a heavy price. The daughter of Othame, one of Paul's Fedaykin commandos, asks Paul to visit her father in secret, and while Paul realizes she has been replaced by a face dancer, his prescient visions show that revealing this will lead to futures he wishes to avoid. Paul is forced to admit the face dancer after she asks to be taken into Paul's household, although he places her under guard. He then visits Othame. Othame reveals evidence of a conspiracy against Muad'Dib among the Fremen, some of whom are distrustful of following the Atreides, and gives Paul his Tleilaxu servant Bijaz, who, like a recording machine, can remember faces, names, and details. Paul accepts reluctantly, seeing the strands of a Tleilaxu plot. As Paul's soldiers attack the conspirators, the Tleilaxu set off a stone burner that destroys the vicinity and blinds Paul. Paul is able to continue in leadership by fixing his actions precisely in line with what his previous oracular visions showed him. By moving through his life in lockstep with his previous visions, he can see even the slightest details of the world around him. The disadvantage of this is his inability to change any part of his destiny, so long as he wishes to appear sighted. The unraveling of the conspiracy reveals that Korba, high priest of Paul's church, is among Paul's enemies, and while Korba tried to deny this, persuading the Fremen Nabes of his innocence, Paul arrives to confront him directly, and Korba is put into Stilgar's custody. Hate interrogates Bijaz, but the dwarf, secretly a Tleilaxu master, uses planted conditioning words and whistle tunes to control the Gola, and programs Hate to offer Paul a bargaining when Chani dies. Bijaz offers Chani's return as a Gola and the hope that Duncan Idaho might be reawakened in return for Paul sacrificing the throne and going into exile. Unknown to Hate, this also activates a hidden compulsion that will force him to kill Paul given the appropriate circumstance. News emerges that Chani has died giving birth to 2 healthy children, Leto and Ganima. The twins are pre-born due to their father's prescient nature and Chani's encounter with the spice essence while pregnant. News of the birth is delivered to Paul, who foresaw Ganima's birth but had not had any prescient warning of Leto's possible existence. His reaction to Chani's death triggers the compulsions in Hate's mind, and he attempts to kill Paul, but reacting against its own programming, Hate's body remembers itself and his genetic memory returns to his consciousness, effectively returning Duncan Idaho to life. Paul is unsurprised by this, having foreseen it. As Paul nears a crucial decision point in time, causing his prophetic visions to fail and rendering him totally blind, he is thrust into a deadly standoff. Scytale, disguised as Othame's daughter, holds a knife to the necks of Paul's children. He offers to revive Chani as a Gola in return for Paul's abdication. Refusal of the offer would result in the murder of Paul's newborn children. However, Paul taps into Leto's conscious perspective via the bloodline connection, and using his son's eyes, he is able to throw a dagger and kill Scytale. After the birth of his children, Ganima and Leto, Paul became convinced he had lost his prescient abilities. He did not foresee the birth of his son, only his daughter. Therefore, as no more than a blind Fremen, Paul disappeared into the desert, offering himself up to Shai Hulud, as was the Fremen custom for the blind. This action made a powerful statement. It signified to the Fremen that Paul's interest was for the tribe, and that even he, Usul, Paul, who was Muad'Dib, was not above Fremen law. Many years after his apparent death alone in the desert, and while the Atreides Empire was under the regency of his younger sister Alia Atreides, a new figure, the Preacher, appeared from the deep desert. By urging civil disobedience against the Atreides Empire and warning of the consequences of agreeing Arrakis, the Preacher attracted an ever-increasing number of followers. Many believed this thundering blind stranger to be Paul Atreides, as he was blind and led by a boy. The Preacher eventually revealed himself to his son, Leto, and the two of them traveled throughout Arrakis, breaching the water storage of every siege so that it would spill out onto the sand. Eventually, Leto and the Preacher returned to Arrakeen to confront Alia, who had clearly shown herself to be an abomination by this time. Eventually, rising tensions saw Alia commit suicide in front of her mother and Leto. During the ensuing chaos, the Preacher was assassinated in Arrakeen, but not before he had revealed beyond a doubt to Gurney Halleck and Jessica that he was indeed Paul Atreides. Thus, the great Paul Atreides, son of Leto the Just, and the first Atreides to ascend to the Golden Lion throne since its inception more than 10,000 years prior, was dead, passing into legend for eons to come, laying the way forward for his son to take the Golden Path to its logical conclusion. While Paul envisioned the Golden Path, the ultimate transformation that would see his humanity dissolve into a sandworm frightened him. Upon revealing himself to his son, Paul confessed that his desire to maintain his humanity and the fear of abject loneliness that the Golden Path would bring were too much for him. He related that he walked away from what he knew he had to do and admired but lamented for his own son who had taken on the mantle that would see humanity restored, but at the cost of his own. So let's go back to our original question. Is Paul truly the hero of the first two books? Throughout Paul's rise to superhuman status, he follows a plotline common to many stories describing the birth of a hero. He has unfortunate circumstances forced onto him, and after a long period of hardship and exile, he confronts and defeats the source of evil in his tale. As such, Dune is representative of a general trend beginning in 1960s American science fiction in that it features a character who attains godlike status through scientific means. Paul's riding and controlling a giant sandworm cements him as a Fremen leader, and he eventually gains a level of omniscience which leads to his ascension to the imperial throne and causes the Fremen to worship him like a god. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, the definition of hero is a person who is admired for having done something very brave or having achieved something great. In the case of Paul, this truly fits the description of a hero. He saved the people of Arrakis from the terrible rule of the Harkonnens and changed Arrakis from a desert to a lavish paradise. Even though his jihad resulted in the deaths of 61 billion people, it was far from the worst outcome, which people fail to realize. Also, in the book, Chani doesn't question the prophecy. She's a mostly passive character who just supports Paul. The book does explore how wrong it is that the Atreides use prophecy to manipulate the Fremen, but that's mostly done through the thoughts of Paul and Jessica. It looks like the movie makes this theme more explicit by having Chani loudly reject the exploitation of her people. Even Paul understands how wrong it is to manipulate the people of Arrakis via false prophecy, but he realizes that he has no choice. He didn't use it to manipulate people for his own good, but he was forced to. When it comes to his role as a messiah, it's a different story. Dune further establishes Paul as a messiah through its implementation of non-linear chronology, a common semantic element of science fiction. For sci-fi saviors, prophecy typically comes in the form of knowledge of the future. Often, this knowledge ends up being the very reason for the Messiah's existence, creating a time loop. Paul, who initially rejects the idea of being the One, has visions of the future induced by the psychoactive spice, which imply that he is. As his premonitions continue to come to pass, Paul begins to accept his destiny and allows the visions to guide him on his path to becoming the One. Therefore, his knowledge of the future is what causes this future to come into existence in the first place, reinforcing the idea that it is Paul's destiny. Paul's visions of his own future influence his choices, suggesting that they were never his in the first place. Paul is the One. It is not his choice, it is his calling, and he must answer, and it was only natural that he couldn't fully handle his title as a Messiah, because in truth he was never meant to be the One, but his son was, which is the reason why Leto II was so much more effective as a Kwisatz Haderach than his father, because in truth, he is the true main character of the Dune series instead of his father. Paul was just unlucky due to Jessica messing with the Bene Gesserit's plan, but even despite that, he still tried his max to fulfill his forced role, which he took as any normal human would.